Let's dive right into the 2026 outlook for the die-casting zinc alloy market. We're looking at brand new data from SMM, so let's get straight to the numbers. So, at first glance, 2025 seemed pretty straightforward. The average operating rate for domestic die-casting zinc alloy producers went up by just under 0.5% year over year. A small positive number, right? But believe me, that number is hiding a much bigger story. Yeah, that tiny increase, it's actually papering over some pretty wild swings. You see, 2025 was basically a tale of two completely different halves, a real story of a market being pulled in opposite directions. So let's get into it. The first half of the year, we saw a big jump. A lot of that was driven by the usual peak manufacturing season, the whole golden March and silver April thing, plus an export rush with companies trying to get ahead of possible tariffs. But then the second half hit, and things started to pull back as the industry's overall prosperity kind of cooled off. And that really sets a complex stage for 2026. Okay, so with that roller coaster of a year behind us, what's in store for the year ahead? Well, let's start with the good news. We're going to look at the demand picture for 2026, which is looking surprisingly solid. And where's that stability coming from? Well, it's pretty much all about policy support across some really key sectors. In real estate, ongoing government policies are expected to prop up demand for things like architectural hardware. For home appliances, you've got this dual punch of trade ins and subsidies that should boost production. And you can't forget the auto sector, where the trade in policy is helping out both traditional and new energy vehicles. So the bottom line on demand is pretty clear. Things look solid. With that kind of policy backing these major sectors, the industry really isn't expecting any major nosedives. The foundation for consumption seems strong. But stable demand is only one piece of the puzzle. We have to talk about the real headache for producers in 2026, and that is the massive and frankly worsening squeeze on profit margins. This is where the pressure is really on. I mean, producers are really getting caught in a pincer move here. From one direction, you've got high costs. The prices for raw materials, zinc, aluminum, copper, the essentials, they've been climbing. And from the other direction, you've got this brutal low price competition because end users are trying to save a buck themselves, so they're going for cheaper options. And listen to this, the SMM report is very clear on this point. They're basically saying that this clash, this contradiction between low price competition and high costs is only going to get worse in 2026. This is putting a ton of operational pressure on small and medium sized companies. All right, so let's shift gears for a second and look outside the domestic market because there's a big wild card in play here, and it all has to do with the export environment, specifically a very important window related to US China tariffs. Okay, so pay attention to this timeline. Back on October 30th, 2025, an agreement was made to suspend some of those big tariffs. Now that suspension has an end date, November 10th, 2026. This creates a really specific and temporary window of opportunity for exporters. And since die-casting zinc alloy products are part of that suspension, there's a real chance to push more exports to the US market in 2026. But, and this is a big but, it's a classic double-edged sword. It's an opportunity, for sure, but everyone needs to be vigilant about the uncertainty here, because this is a temporary fix, not a permanent solution. Okay, so we've covered demand, we've talked about the profit squeeze, and we've touched on the export wildcard. So what does this all mean for you, for your strategy? Let's boil it all down to the key strategic takeaways for 2026. So here's the 2026 market in a nutshell. Demand looks stable, mostly because of that government support. Profitability, that's going to be a huge battleground, with pressure from both high costs and fierce competition. And exports, there's a window of opportunity, but it's not going to be open forever. So why does all of this matter? Well, here's the bottom line. Banking on that stable demand just isn't going to cut it. It's not enough. The real winners in 2026 will be the companies that can figure out how to navigate these insane cost pressures and that tough competition. That is the name of the game. And that really leaves us with one final critical question for you to think about. When you look at this whole picture, rising costs set against a backdrop of steady demand, is your strategy really ready for what's coming in 2026?